Okay, thank you, Robbie. Our speaker for today is someone who has been part of our community for a long time, and we always enjoy his wise messages. It's Kevin Hauber. Kevin, come on up.
Good morning. Good to be back with you. So the title that I started with for this is Waiting for Change. Kristen and I were having a conversation recently about the sense of knowing that something is coming, that change is afoot, even though there's nothing going on the outside that would indicate that. Ever known that one? Ever experienced that kind of a feeling? The momentum is building for something, even though I don't see the outer result yet, but I can feel that something's coming. Not seeing the result requires a lot of faith and patience, doesn't it? Matter of fact, that's quite an understatement, because typically that's really frustrating. You know, it's the God, give me patience, but I want it now. Right? I think you know that one. So another thing that situation requires is the ability to let go of what is or what was and release into something new without knowing the outcome. Releasing into something new without knowing the outcome. That's scary, isn't it? That's a very unsure kind of thing. But we're going to talk about that process today, and I'm going to share some things that I found in looking into that that seem to be meaningful, and I hope you find the same. Most of us, I dare say, maybe even all of us, don't get taught about the process of releasing and grieving. When we're feeling grief ourselves, there's a tendency to isolate, to want to go away from others for a variety of reasons, at least for most people. And when we're in the presence of others who are grieving, often it feels awkward and uncomfortable because of what's coming out. It is difficult to be with the pain of another, isn't it? Matter of fact, I think that's another untaught skill that's a tremendous thing, and we don't really get lessons in that, do we? How to be with our own pain and with the pain of another. And if you go back to first noble truth of Buddhism, life contains pain. So we better get used to dealing with that if we're going to somehow transcend just the physicality of stuff. I've never been through a Grieving 101 course. Have you? Ever seen one of those? In fact, when grief shows up, it can be quite foreign. I remember having an experience of grief showing up for me when I was having some significant issues going on a number of years ago, and I didn't recognize it for a while. I didn't recognize that there was this deep grief showing up, that something was ending, and that there was something new that I didn't fully know or understand or know what it even was going to look like. That's hard to release into that. So here's an analogy that came to me about this. Have you ever watched gymnasts at work or gymnasts performing in various events? Now, one of the beautiful aspects of that sport to me is knowing when to let go of the handhold or the foothold that you have and release, which usually involves some period of not being, stable, to be able to get to the next handhold or foothold. It can be a really graceful thing. Really, really beautiful. And notice also that there's a lot of practice that's involved in that. It's something that we have to build a skill set around and build enough trust to know when to let go and know that we will be taken care of. It's like Sadie Blanton used to say that, when one door closes, another opens, but the hallways between them are a bitch. Right? It's that letting go part of things. It doesn't all happen the first time, and often there are stumbles along the way. Now, you see that very clearly in something like gymnastics. But isn't that true for our spiritual process also? And for our practices that we engage in to learn when to let go again and again and again so that we can find that new handhold, that new foothold. So I found some material by Richard Rohr. Now, those of you who might be familiar with Richard Rohr, he is a Franciscan priest, part of the Franciscan order. He's written and created numerous things over time. I first got to know his work on the Enneagram many years ago, and I still have a set of cassette tapes on the Enneagram that he did, which gives you an idea of how long ago that was. Because I don't think you can even get a cassette player in a new car anymore. You have to go somewhere to a secondhand store to be able to get a cassette player anymore. So it's been a while. But he also has written a book that's titled The Art of Letting Go, Living the Wisdom of St. Francis. Now, if you remember the story of St. Francis was a renunciate, and he had all of the trappings of all of the merchant family and everything going for him, and he gave that all up as a renunciate and went into nature. And so Franciscans have a lot of that kind of renunciate stuff going on. Here's a quote from Rohr in The Art of Letting Go. He says, "All great spirituality teaches about letting go of what you don't need and who you are not." What you don't need and who you are not. Then when you can get little enough and naked enough and poor enough, you'll find that the little place where you really are is ironically more than enough and is all that you need. Classical spiritual paradox. Yeah. At that place, you'll have nothing to prove to anybody and nothing to protect. That place is called freedom. It's the freedom of the children of God. Such people can connect with everybody. They don't feel the need to eliminate anybody. That's quite a start, isn't it? Yeah. So here's another quote that I found notable. "The movement toward gratitude, authenticity, and union is the natural and organic work of the second half of our lives." Have you ever noticed that? That might be a shift that would be going on for you. The movement toward gratitude, authenticity, and union is the natural and organic work of the second half of our lives. And then finally, and most simply, he says, all spiritual maturity is about letting go. All spiritual maturity is about letting go. Wow. So think about that. What part of us clings and denies what is, or fears what might be? It is surely not the mature part. My experience is that most of the time, the part of us that doesn't want to let go is quite young and generally immature and doesn't have good coping skills. Change is hard for those parts of ourselves, isn't it? It's hard to let go, particularly if we've collected a lifetime of traumas that make us want to go back to the way they were in the good old days, however we're framing the good old days to be, which seems to be a moving target in itself. Now, Rohr coalesces the wisdom of all of this into 9 stages of recovering your true self. And each stage is defined by a particular sense of identity. This reminded me of something that happened here a while back. I was at the muffler shop. I was having some trailer hitch stuff done on one of the cars. And there was a guy there with this enormous Dodge Ram pickup diesel kind of truck, big wheels, big everything. And it had a bumper sticker on the back that said, "I identify as a Prius." Identify as a Prius. A little bit of identification issue between the inside and the outside, maybe. Okay, so this is talking about how we identify. So some form of suffering at each stage of identification operates to persuade us that that sense of identity is inadequate for dealing with life as it really is. So here's the progression that he describes. So I'm gonna go through this progression as he discusses it, but my take on this is that this is not necessarily linear, and that it's not necessarily exclusive, that there may very well be several of these identity issues going on at the same time in different areas of our life. So think in those terms, but I think you might find resonance with some of these things that he discusses. But just take in the information. Stage 1. My body is who I am. Know that one? So at this stage, we are preoccupied with pleasure and security. We progress beyond this stage by being able to endure some degree of bodily discomfort. And I would add that this becomes hard to avoid as we age. There is going to be some degree of bodily discomfort going on. Stage 2, my external behavior is who I am. And at this stage, we're preoccupied with in-group and out-group thinking. We hide, posture, and pretend, denying our darker sides even to ourselves. We progress beyond this stage by being able to acknowledge our darker side. Stage 3, my thoughts and feelings are who I am. At this stage, we develop a sophisticated defense of our egoism. Knowledge is used as a substitute for transformation. Ooh. Knowledge is used as a substitute for transformation. I think, therefore I am. Easy to get stuck in that one, isn't it? Is there something beyond knowledge? Is there something beyond thinking? Progressing beyond this stage requires the biggest dying of all the stages, a profound humiliation of the strategy one has been using to get by. Ever have that kind of situation come up where it's everything that I use doesn't work anymore? Ever hit the wall on that one? Stage 4. My deeper intuitions are who I am. So at this stage, we become preoccupied with self-work. Self-work. Do you know people who are working on themselves, or maybe doing some of that yourself, eye roll included, right? We recognize that life has deeper meaning. We may ignore God and others as we bask in the superiority of our nascent enlightenment. Ouch. I'm going to say that again because that's a good takeaway. We may ignore God and others as we bask in the superiority of our nascent enlightenment. Ever heard the term spiritual arrogance? Yeah. We progress beyond this stage by becoming dissatisfied with the myopia of feeding on the vibrations of our own limited nature and experience. It's not just about me. There is more than we are all individually aware of. Stage 5. My shadow self is who I am. At this stage, we come to see that we really only love ourselves. This stage can last a very long time. Ever know anybody who was stuck in their shadow self? Ever seen that one? We must encounter radical grace in the midst of our own unworthiness. We progress beyond this stage by coming to grips with God's truly unmerited favor. And isn't that a great definition for grace? God's truly unmerited favor. We become reconciled to life's inherent contradictions and capable of true self-critical thought. It's getting juicy, isn't it? Stage 6. I am empty and powerless. Almost sounds like the start of a 12-step program, doesn't it? At this stage, our ability to cope utterly fails. Life circumstances take us to rock bottom. We feel extremely small and deeply incompetent. We progress beyond this stage by finding a new source of life, an identity transplant, if you will, in Jesus' words, by being born again. Stage 7. I am so much more than I thought I was. At this stage, the false self has experienced a major defeat. The stage feels like an acceptable emptiness. How about that for a term? Acceptable emptiness. We find little joy in doing good, but we do it anyway. It is the dark night of faith, which I relate to the idea of the dark night of the soul. We progress beyond this stage by realizing that we can be at home in this state because God is holding us. Stage 8. I and the Father are one. This stage is characterized by unity consciousness or unitive consciousness, knowing that God is in oneself and oneself is in God. We are ready for death because we know we are so much more than our earthly bodies. We no longer rely on status symbols because it's just enough to be who we are. We progress beyond this stage by ceasing to identify even with our own sense of spiritual progress. How about that? That's a letting go, isn't it? Ceasing to identify even with our own sense of spiritual progress. Stage 9. I am who I am, warts and all. This is the stage of the holy fools who know their own shadow selves. They know that they themselves are the enemy and that God loves them in spite of that. All pretense falls away. They're able to see God in everything. Arrival at this stage is seen as a childlike lack of self-consciousness and the practice of humbly loving one's enemies. Humbly loving one's enemies. Wow. Where have I heard that kind of thing before? Do any of these stages sound familiar to you? Seen anything like that or experienced anything like that with anyone? It's pretty fascinating. Now, I recognize there's the darker aspect to that that he talks about within that. But there are these things that churn in us and ask us to identify ourselves as something new, letting go of the old, releasing that handhold, and then flying to catch the new handhold. Do you get the idea? Yeah. So I would posit that there is a letting go in every one of these identity transitions that Rohr talks about, that this is part of us growing. And it hurts to let go of the way things were, especially if we like the way things were, right? I'm not in my 20s anymore. I don't have the same kind of energy that I had in my 20s. I see that in my son, because he's 28 now, and he's got all of that energy going on. It's like, go guy, go. I'm going to go take a nap. you know, there is an evolution in how we identify ourselves. The world may be stuck in identity at a particular level. I would pose that a lot of the world is still stuck in the eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth mentality that is very much at the base level, the Old Testament level. And we're being asked to identify beyond that, even in the midst of all of the stuff that's going around that. We see and hear about it every day. The world may be stuck at a particular level and a particular identity, but we get to choose what we will experience. So what kind of change, what kind of new identity is brewing for you? What's asking to show up that you may not even have a concept of what it looks like yet, but that there's something stirring? What's asking for your evolution? So just having an awareness of that and having the patience and the faith to be able to see that through is a huge step forward. Remember that all spiritual maturity is about letting go. So thank you and bless you. Namaste. It's good to be with you again.